Have you ever watched someone strut around a kingdom they didn't realize they were already evicted from? You know the type, the other woman, who thinks a diamond ring and a stolen husband make her the queen of the castle. Today's story is about a family gathering that was supposed to be a celebration, but turned into a battlefield. It's about a mistress named Jessica, who pushed a silent wife named Eleanor too far, right in front of the town's elite. But Jessica forgot one crucial thing. In a game of chess, you never underestimate the Queen Mother. When the deed to the mansion finally hit the table, the silence was louder than a scream. Buckle up. You won't believe how this ends. The invitation was cream-colored, heavy cardstock, with gold leaf lettering that practically sneered at you if you couldn't afford the paper it was printed on. It read, "The 70th Jubilee of Matriarch Beatrice Sterling." For 20 years, Eleanor Sterling had organized these parties. She knew that Beatrice preferred white hydrangeas over roses, that the champagne had to be chilled to exactly 45 degrees, and that under no circumstances was Cousin Larry allowed near the open bar before 8:10 p.m. Eleanor was the wife of Beatrice's only son, Richard Sterling. She was the invisible glue that held the Sterling dynasty together, quiet, efficient, and perpetually overlooked. But this year, the invitation hadn't come from Eleanor's desk. It had arrived in her mailbox, just like a common guest. Richard had left Eleanor 6 months ago. It wasn't a clean break, it was a slow, humiliating fracture. He hadn't just moved out, he had moved her in. Her name was Jessica Vane. She was 24, an influencer, with a shaky grasp of spelling, but a firm grasp on Richard's midlife crisis. Eleanor stood in the foyer of the modest townhouse she was currently renting, staring at the invitation. "Are you going?" Eleanor turned. Her daughter Sarah stood on the stairs. At 19, Sarah had inherited Eleanor's dark eyes, but none of her mother's passivity. Sarah was furious at the world, but mostly at her father. "It's your grandmother's 70th, Sarah. It's a milestone. I have to go out of respect for Beatrice." "Respect?" Sarah scoffed, coming down the stairs. "Dad is bringing her, Mum. He told me. He said Jessica is excited to meet the extended family. It's a humiliation ritual. If you go, you're just giving them an audience." Eleanor smoothed the front of her cardigan. Sarah didn't understand. She saw Richard's betrayal as a fire that needed to be fought with gasoline. Eleanor saw it as a stain that needed to be treated with cold water and patience. But there was something else, too. Beatrice Sterling, the formidable matriarch, had called Eleanor 3 days ago. The conversation had been brief. "Be there, Eleanor. Wear the blue silk. And do not, under any circumstances, let Richard see you cry. I have matters to attend to." "I'm going," Eleanor said firmly, "and you're coming with me. We are Sterlings. We don't hide." Sarah rolled her eyes, but she didn't argue further. She grabbed her car keys. "Fine. But if Jessica tries to talk to me, I'm throwing a drink on her. I don't care if it's Grandma's vintage Merlot." The Sterling estate, known locally as Harrow's Gate, was a sprawling Victorian mansion sitting on 4 acres of prime real estate just outside of Charleston. It was old money, the kind of money that didn't shout, it whispered. But tonight, Harrow's Gate was shouting. As Eleanor and Sarah pulled their sensible sedan up the long gravel driveway, they were greeted by a sensory assault. The usually tasteful landscape lighting had been replaced by garish, color-changing LED strips wrapping around the ancient oak trees. A DJ booth was set up on the front lawn, blasting a remix of a pop song that had no business being played at a 70-year-old's birthday. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, staring out the window. "It looks like a nightclub exploded on the lawn." "Just breathe," Eleanor said. Though her own knuckles were white on the steering wheel, valets in red vests rushed to open their doors. Eleanor stepped out, smoothing the blue silk dress Beatrice had requested. It was elegant, timeless, and understated. Standing at the top of the stone stairs, greeting guests where Eleanor had stood for 2 decades, was Jessica. She was wearing a dress that cost more than Eleanor's car, a shimmering, backless gold number that was stunning, undeniably, but completely wrong for a garden jubilee. It was a red carpet dress, a look-at-me dress. Jessica was clinging to Richard's arm, her perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on his bicep. Richard looked tired. He was handsome in that silver fox way that rich men age into, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked like a man holding his breath. As Eleanor ascended the stairs, the chatter among the guests nearby died down. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The wife versus the mistress. The collision. Jessica spotted them, her face lit up with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Eleanor!" Jessica squealed, her voice pitching high enough to crack glass. She let go of Richard and descended 2 steps, effectively looking down at Eleanor. "I'm so glad you decided to come. Richard and I weren't sure if you'd feel comfortable." The insult was wrapped in fake concern, delivered with surgical precision. "It's Beatrice's birthday," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "I wouldn't miss it." Of course," Jessica nodded, flipping her long, blonde extensions over her shoulder. "I've been running ragged, trying to organize this whole thing. You know how it is. Well, actually, you probably used a planner, didn't you? I wanted to do it all myself. A personal touch for Mom." "Mom." Sarah made a choking sound in the back of her throat. Eleanor reached back and squeezed her daughter's hand. "It's very vibrant," Eleanor said, glancing at the purple LED lights pulsing on the porch columns. "Right?" Jessica beamed, missing the critique entirely. "I told Richard, we need to bring this old place into the 21st century. It was so dusty and grey before. It needed life." Richard finally spoke, shifting uncomfortably in his tuxedo. "Hello, Eleanor. Sarah, you look lovely." "Hi, Dad," Sarah said, her voice dripping with ice. She looked pointedly at Jessica. "Where's Grandma? Inside, hiding from the techno music?" "She's resting in the library," Richard said quickly, cutting off Jessica's retort. "She'll be out for the toasts." "Go on in." Jessica waved a hand dismissively, like she was shooing away the hired help. "Grab a drink. The signature cocktail is the Jess Teeny. It's vodka and passion fruit. Try it, Eleanor. You look like you need to loosen up." Eleanor didn't take the bait. She simply nodded and walked past them, head held high, into the house that had been her home for 25 years. Inside, the transformation was even more jarring. The antique furniture in the foyer had been moved out to make room for a sleek, modern white bar. The portrait of Richard's great-grandfather had been taken down, replaced by a massive abstract painting that looked like a splatter of neon paint. "She's trying to erase us," Sarah hissed as they navigated the crowded room. "She's literally redecorating the house before the ink is even dry on the divorce papers." "The papers aren't signed yet, Sarah," Eleanor reminded her quietly. "That makes it worse. She has no right." "Eleanor!" A booming voice came from the left. It was Arthur Higgins, the family lawyer, and a man who had known Eleanor since she was a nervous bride. He was holding a glass of scotch and looking deeply distressed. "Arthur," Eleanor smiled, relieved to see a friendly face. "My dear." Arthur took her hands. He leaned in close, lowering his voice. "I tried to stop the lights outside, and the DJ, Beatrice is currently meditating so she doesn't commit a felony." "Is she okay?" Eleanor asked. Arthur's eyes twinkled with a strange mixture of amusement and anticipation. Beatrice? Oh, she's better than okay. She's plotting. She's been in the library with me for the last 2 hours reviewing documents. Documents? You didn't hear this from me, Arthur whispered, glancing over Eleanor's shoulder to make sure Richard wasn't nearby. But Jessica has been pushing Richard to change the deed. She wants her name on Harrow's gate. She's worried about security for their future children. Eleanor felt a cold pit open in her stomach. Future children. Apparently that's the rumor, Arthur grimaced. But don't worry about the deed, Eleanor. Richard brought the paperwork tonight. He wants to get Beatrice to sign off on the transfer of ownership as a birthday gift to him, effectively handing the estate over to him and Jessica. He wouldn't, Eleanor whispered. This house has been in the Sterling name for 100 years. He knows Beatrice would never let Jessica Vane put her name on it. Arthur took a sip of his scotch. Love makes men stupid, Eleanor. Lust makes them insane. But tonight is going to be interesting. Just stay close to the front when the speeches start. Before Eleanor could ask what he meant, a high-pitched clinking sound echoed through the room. Jessica was standing on the grand staircase, Beatrice's staircase, tapping a spoon against a champagne flute. The crowd quieted down. "Attention! Attention, everyone!" Jessica shouted, beaming. "If everyone could please make their way to the ballroom. It's time for the main event. And I don't mean the cake." She giggled, looking down at Richard, who was standing at the foot of the stairs, looking up at her with a mixture of adoration and anxiety. "Come on," Jessica waved. "We have a big announcement before Mum comes out." Eleanor exchanged a look with Arthur. "Showtime," Arthur muttered. As the crowd herded toward the ballroom, Eleanor felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find herself face to chest with Beatrice's head of housekeeping, Maria. Maria had been crying. "Mrs. Sterling," Maria whispered, clutching Eleanor's arm. "Please, you have to stop her." "Stop who, Maria? Jessica?" "She fired me," Maria sobbed quietly. "Just now, in the kitchen. She said the hors d'oeuvres were stale, and that when she takes over officially tomorrow, she wants a younger, fresher staff. I've been here 30 years. Rage, hot and sudden, finally flared in Eleanor's chest. It was one thing to insult her dress. It was one thing to steal her husband. But to come into this house and fire the woman who had nursed Sarah through the flu, who had helped Eleanor polish the silver for 20 Christmases. Eleanor looked at the ballroom doors. "She's not taking over anything, Maria," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly cold. "Dry your eyes. You're serving the cake tonight? Go." Maria looked at Eleanor, stunned by the authority in her voice. "But, Mr. Richard isn't in charge tonight," Eleanor said, channeling every ounce of Beatrice Sterling she had absorbed over the years. "I am still Mrs. Sterling. Now go." Maria nodded, wiped her face, and hurried back to the kitchen. Eleanor turned to Sarah and Arthur. "Let's go to the ballroom. I want a front row seat." The ballroom of Harrow's Gate was a masterpiece of old-world architecture. High coffered ceilings, crystal chandeliers the size of small cars, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. But tonight, Jessica had done her best to ruin it. She had set up a massive projector screen in front of the antique fireplace. A slideshow was playing on a loop, photos of Jessica and Richard on a yacht in Saint-Tropez, Jessica and Richard skiing in Aspen, Jessica and Richard posing in front of this very house. It was a shrine to their 6-month affair, broadcast in high definition. Eleanor stood near the back, by the shrimp cocktail tower. She felt like a ghost haunting her own life. "Look at that," Sarah seethed, pointing at a table near the front. "That's the head table. There are 3 chairs. Dad, Jessica, and an empty one for Grandma." "Where are we sitting?" Eleanor scanned the room. She found their name cards eventually. They were placed at table 19, the table closest to the swinging kitchen doors, usually reserved for distant cousins or the photographer's assistant. "She put us in the nosebleeds," Sarah said, her voice rising, "in our own house." "Quiet," Eleanor warned. "The show is starting." The lights dimmed, leaving only a spotlight on the center of the dance floor. Jessica glided into the light, holding a microphone. Richard stood a few steps behind her, looking like a bodyguard who had lost the will to live. "Hi, everyone," Jessica beamed. "Is everyone having a fab time? I know Beatrice usually does things a bit stuffier, but I thought, hey, 70 is the new 50, right?" A few younger guests chuckled nervously. The older generation, Beatrice's friends, the pillars of Charleston society, remained stone-faced. "So," Jessica continued, pacing the floor like a talk show host, "we are all here to honor Beatrice. But Richard and I also wanted to take this moment, with all our loved ones present, to share some news. Since we are all family here. Well, mostly family." Jessica's eyes scanned the room and locked directly on Eleanor at table 19. The spotlight operator, taking a cue he must have been paid for, swiveled the light to hit Eleanor. The room gasped. Eleanor was blinded by the sudden glare. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Eleanor," Jessica called out over the speakers. "So brave of you to come." "Really? I was telling Richard, it takes a big person to admit when their time is up and step aside gracefully. Let's give Eleanor a round of applause for being such a good sport." It was a public execution, disguised as a compliment. The applause was scattered and awkward. People looked at their shoes. Arthur Higgins, the lawyer, looked like he was about to throw his glass at the stage. Eleanor didn't move. She didn't smile. She just stared into the light, refusing to shrink. "Anyway," Jessica chirped, signaling the spotlight back to herself, "Richard and I have been so blessed, and we realized that this big, beautiful house needs more than just a fresh coat of paint. It needs a future." She grabbed Richard's hand and pulled him forward. He looked pale. "We are thrilled to announce," Jessica placed a hand on her flat stomach, "that the Sterling legacy is secure. We are expecting a baby boy in the winter." The silence that followed was deafening. It lasted only a second, but it felt like an hour. Then the polite reflex of the rich kicked in. A smattering of applause broke out. "Congratulations! How wonderful!" Sarah dropped her purse. "No," she whispered. He didn't. Jessica basked in the attention. "And because we want our son to grow up in his rightful home, Richard and I have been working on some legal housekeeping. We want to ensure that Harrow's Gate stays in the immediate family, the active family." She turned to Richard. "Honey, tell them about the gift." Richard cleared his throat. He looked at the floor, then at the crowd. "Yes. Well, we have prepared the transfer documents. Tonight, we hope to finalize the ownership of the estate, so my mother can retire in peace without the burden of managing this property." "Retire in peace?" a voice boomed from the back of the room. "I wasn't aware I was dying, Richard." The double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. The music cut out. The murmuring stopped. Standing there, leaning on an ebony cane topped with a silver hawk's head, was Beatrice Sterling. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, but she cast a shadow 10 feet long. She was wearing a deep purple velvet gown and a diamond necklace that had likely been insured for more than the GDP of a small country. Her white hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply began to walk. Thump, Step, thump, step. The sound of her cane on the hard wood floor was the only noise in the room. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. "Mom!" Richard's voice cracked. He started to rush toward her, but Beatrice held up a single, gloved hand. He stopped dead in his tracks. Beatrice walked past table 19. She paused. She looked at Eleanor, then at the kitchen doors, then back at Eleanor. Beatrice's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing to her daughter-in-law. She kept walking until she reached the stage. She didn't take the stairs. She stood at the bottom, looking up at Jessica. "Happy birthday, Beatrice," Jessica squealed, though her voice wavered. She hurried down the stairs to offer a hug. "We were just—" "Do not touch me," Beatrice said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room. Jessica froze, her arms mid-air. "I am 70 years old," Beatrice addressed the room, turning her back on Jessica. "I am not deaf, and I am certainly not senile. I heard you have a gift for me, Richard." Richard walked down the stairs, clutching a leather portfolio. "Mother, it's a formality, really. We just want to take the burden off you. The upkeep, the taxes. Jessica and I want to handle it. For the baby." "The baby," Beatrice repeated flatly. She looked at Jessica's stomach. "I see." "It's a boy," Jessica interjected, recovering her confidence. "A sterling heir. We're going to name him Beatrice, or, well, Beau." "After you." Beatrice stared at her. "You are going to name a boy, Beatrice?" "Beau," Jessica corrected quickly. "But the point is, we need to secure his future. And yours. We've set up a lovely condo for you in Florida. It's right on the beach. You love the beach." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. They were kicking the matriarch out to Florida. Beatrice looked at Richard. "You are evicting me? On my birthday?" "No. No, Mom," Richard stammered, sweat glistening on his forehead. "It's a vacation home. You can stay here whenever you want. But the deed, the ownership needs to be with the head of the household, for tax purposes." "Ah," Beatrice nodded slowly. "Tax purposes. And the head of the household? That would be you." "Yes," Richard said. "And her?" Beatrice pointed the tip of her cane at Jessica. "As my wife. Eventually." "Yes," Richard muttered. Beatrice looked at the leather portfolio in Richard's hand. "Let me see the papers." The room was suspended in a state of high-wire tension. The waiters had stopped serving champagne. The DJ had abandoned his booth. Everyone was watching the small, frail woman and the leather folder. Richard handed the portfolio to his mother. Beatrice didn't open it immediately. She walked over to the head table, the one with the 3 chairs. She sat in the center chair, placed her cane against the table, and pulled a pair of reading glasses from her clutch. "Arthur," she called out. Arthur Higgins emerged from the crowd, looking grim but ready. He walked to the table and stood behind Beatrice like a sentinel. "Did you review these, Arthur?" Beatrice asked, flipping open the heavy document. "I did, Mrs. Sterling," Arthur said loudly. "It is a standard quitclaim deed. It transfers all rights, title and interest of the property known as Harrow's Gate from Beatrice Sterling to Richard Sterling and Jessica Vane as joint tenants with rights of survivorship." "Meaning?" Beatrice asked, feigning ignorance. "Meaning," Arthur clarified, his eyes boring into Richard, "that once you sign this, you no longer own this house. They can sell it, renovate it, or evict anyone they choose. You would have zero legal claim to the roof over your head." Jessica stepped forward, her hand resting on Richard's shoulder. "Arthur, you're making it sound so dramatic. We're family. We would never kick Mom out. We just want to modernize. We have big plans. We're going to put in a pool where the rose garden is, and—" "The rose garden," Beatrice interrupted, looking up from the papers. My husband planted that rose garden in 1975. It's full of thorns and bees, Jessica laughed dismissively. A pool is much more lifestyle-friendly. Think of the parties. Beatrice looked down at the paper again. She picked up a heavy silver pen that was lying on the table. Eleanor, watching from the back, felt her heart sink. Beatrice was old. Maybe she was tired. Maybe Richard had worn her down. If Beatrice signed that paper, Jessica won. Not just the house, but the victory. She would have successfully erased Eleanor and Beatrice from the Sterling legacy. "Mum," Richard said softly, sensing her hesitation. "Please, for the family, for the future." Beatrice held the pen over the signature line. Her hand trembled slightly. "I have lived in this house for 50 years, Beatrice said, her voice soft. "I came here as a bride. I raised a son here." She looked at Richard with a gaze so full of disappointment it looked like physical pain. "I thought I knew everything about this house." "You do, Mum," Richard urged. "Just sign." "But," Beatrice sat up straighter. The trembling in her hand stopped. "There is one thing about this house that I think you have forgotten, Richard." "What's that?" Beatrice set the pen down. She didn't sign. Instead, she reached into her own small clutch and pulled out a different document. It was old, yellowed parchment, folded into a square. She unfolded it carefully and smoothed it out on the table next to the crisp white legal papers Richard had provided. "Do you know what this is?" Beatrice asked. Jessica rolled her eyes. "A receipt from the 1800s? "This," Beatrice said, her voice sharpening like a blade, "is the original trust agreement established by your father, Richard, shortly before he died. And this," she pulled out a second, newer document, "is the amendment I made to the family trust 5 years ago, after your first indiscretion." Richard's face went grey. "Mum, what are you talking about?" Beatrice looked at Arthur. "Read the clause, Arthur. Paragraph 4, Section B." Arthur picked up the yellowed document and adjusted his glasses. He projected his voice to the back of the room. "In the event that the primary beneficiary, Richard Sterling, enters into a union or cohabitation that threatens the integrity of the family estate, or attempts to transfer ownership of the ancestral home outside of the direct bloodline's approval," Arthur paused for effect. "The control of the Sterling family trust, including the title to Harrow's Gate and all liquid assets, shall bypass the primary beneficiary entirely." Jessica frowned, trying to process the legal jargon. "Bypass? What does that mean?" "It means," Beatrice said, standing up. She looked taller now, stronger. "It means Richard doesn't own this house. He never did. The trust owns the house. And as the trustee, I have the sole power to determine who resides here." "So you're saying you're the boss?" Jessica scoffed. "Fine, we know that. That's why we need you to sign the deed over to us." "You aren't listening, my dear." Beatrice smiled, and it was a terrifying thing to witness. "Because Richard has attempted to coerce a transfer of ownership, and because he has brought a mistress into this home before the dissolution of his marriage. He has triggered the morality clause of his father's will." Richard looked like he was going to be sick. "Mum, the morality clause? That's archaic. You can't be serious." "I am deadly serious," Beatrice snapped. "Effectively immediately, Richard, you are removed as the beneficiary of the trust." A gasp went through the room. This wasn't just a scolding. This was a disinheritance. "If he's removed," Jessica's voice became shrill, "then who gets it? Who gets the money? Who gets the house?" Beatrice picked up the glass of water in front of her and took a calm sip. "The trust dictates that In the event of the son's disqualification, the assets, all of them, transfer immediately to the next available prudent guardian of the family legacy. Beatrice turned her eyes toward table 19. Arthur, who is the named secondary trustee and primary beneficiary in the amendment from 5 years ago. Arthur smiled, a genuine, wide grin. "The secondary trustee," Arthur announced, his voice ringing off the crystal chandeliers, "is Mrs. Eleanor Sterling." The room went silent. Every head turned toward the kitchen doors, toward the woman in the blue silk dress standing by the shrimp cocktail. Jessica's jaw dropped. Her? The housewife? She's not even a Sterling by blood. She is a Sterling by loyalty. Beatrice slammed her hand on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. She has cared for this house, cared for me, and cared for this family while you were busy trying to sleep your way into a fortune. Beatrice pointed a shaking finger at Eleanor. "Eleanor, come here." Eleanor walked forward. Her legs felt like jelly. But she moved. She walked past the staring guests, past the table where she had been exiled, and up to the head table. "Mom," Richard pleaded, grabbing Beatrice's arm. "You can't give the house to my ex-wife. She's going to divorce me." "She hasn't divorced you yet," Beatrice said coldly, shaking him off. "And technically, she isn't your ex-wife. She is the current Mrs. Sterling, and as of this moment, she is the legal owner of Harrow's Gate." Beatrice picked up the heavy silver pen again. She handed it to Eleanor. "Eleanor," Beatrice said softly, "I'm tired. I'm going to Florida. I really do love the beach. But I can't leave this house to a fool and a gold digger. I'm signing my trusteeship over to you. Right now." "But," Eleanor stammered, holding the pen, "the baby." "Richard." "The baby is innocent," Beatrice said, "but his parents are not. Sign the papers, Eleanor. Save this house." Jessica lunged forward. "Don't you dare! Richard, stop her!" Richard stepped toward Eleanor, his face twisted in anger. "Eleanor, don't do this. If you sign that, I swear—" "You swear what, Richard?" Sarah stepped up beside her mother. She looked at her father with pure disgust. "You've already done your worst. Let Mom do her best." Eleanor looked at Richard. She looked at Jessica, whose face was contorted in ugly, desperate rage. Then she looked at the house around her. She uncapped the pen. She bent down and signed her name with a flourish. Eleanor Sterling. Arthur stamped the document immediately. "Notarized," he said. "Done," Beatrice whispered. "No," Jessica screamed. "This is illegal. This is fraud. I'm pregnant with the heir." "You are pregnant," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly steady as she capped the pen. She turned to face her husband and his mistress. "But you are standing in my house." The power dynamic in the room shifted so violently, the air pressure seemed to change. Eleanor was no longer the scorned wife in the corner. She was the landlady. "Now," Eleanor said, looking at the DJ booth, the lights and the tacky decorations, "I believe this party is over." "You can't kick us out," Jessica hissed. "We live here." Eleanor looked at Arthur. "Arthur, do they have a lease?" "They do not," Arthur replied cheerfully. "They are guests, at will." "Then the will has changed," Eleanor said. She looked Maria, the housekeeper who had been fired an hour ago, standing by the cake. "Maria." "Yes, Mrs. Sterling?" Maria stepped forward, beaming. "Please show Mr. Sterling and Miss Vane to the door. They have 5 minutes to collect their personal effects." "You're joking," Richard laughed nervously. "Eleanor, stop it. Where are we supposed to go?" "I hear the Ritz is nice," Eleanor shrugged. "Or maybe Jessica's apartment." "Oh, wait. You gave that up to move in here, didn't you?" Jessica looked at Richard, panic setting in. "Richard, do something!" But before Richard could speak, a new voice cut through the chaos. A man in a dark suit, who had been standing quietly by the entrance with a camera crew, stepped forward. "Excuse me," the man said. "I'm with the Charleston Gazette. Miss Vane, did you say you were pregnant?" Jessica preened, sensing a chance to spin the narrative. Yes, I am. And this woman is throwing a pregnant woman onto the street." "That's interesting," the reporter said, looking at his phone. "Because my source at the clinic, well, let's just say we received a tip an hour ago about the validity of the ultrasound photos you posted on Instagram." Jessica's face went white, whiter than the tablecloths. "What?" Richard looked at Jessica. "What is he talking about?" Beatrice leaned back in her chair, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Oh, didn't I mention? I had Arthur run a background check, thoroughly." The reporter, a man named Marcus Cole, who had been covering Charleston scandals for a decade, held up his phone. On the screen was a blown-up image of a medical document. "This was sent to our tip line anonymously," Marcus said, his voice calm but loud enough to carry. "It's a billing statement from the Bayside Fertility Clinic, dated 2 weeks ago. It lists a patient named Jessica Vane." "That proves I'm pregnant!" Jessica shrieked, clutching Richard's arm. "See, I went to the doctor." "It proves you went to the clinic," Marcus corrected. "But the procedure billed isn't for prenatal care. It's for a consultation on IVF candidacy." He looked at Richard. "Mr. Sterling, IVF is usually reserved for couples who are having trouble conceiving, or for women who aren't pregnant yet, but want to be." Richard pulled his arm away from Jessica. He looked at her, confusion warring with suspicion in his eyes. "Jessica, you showed me the ultrasound, the little printout. It had the date on it." Jessica's eyes darted around the room. The trap was closing. They made a billing error. That reporter is lying. He's probably working for her." She pointed a trembling finger at Eleanor. Beatrice cleared her throat. It was a dry, dusty sound that silenced the room. "Actually," Beatrice said, "Marcus isn't working for Eleanor. He's working for the truth. And the truth, Jessica, is that I called Dr. Evans." "You can't do that," Jessica gasped. "HIPAA laws, that's illegal." "Dr. Evans is my nephew," Beatrice said with a shrug, "and while he didn't give me your medical file, he did mention that he hasn't seen a patient named Jessica Vane for an obstetrics appointment. Ever. He did, however, mention a young woman coming in to ask for a sample ultrasound printout for a prank on her boyfriend." The air left the room. It was the sound of 100 wealthy people inhaling sharply at once. Richard stared at Jessica. He backed away, step by slow step. "A prank? Richard, listen to me." Jessica grabbed his lapels, desperation making her movements jerky. "I was going to get pregnant. We were trying. I needed to speed up the timeline so your mum would sign the house over. I did it for us." "You lied," Richard whispered. The realization washed over him, turning his face a sickly shade of grey. "You lied about the baby. You lied about the heir." "I did it to secure our future," Jessica screamed, tears now streaming down her face, though whether they were real or performative was anyone's guess. "Because your mother is a stubborn old witch who was never going to give us the money otherwise." "That's enough," Eleanor said. She stepped down from the raised platform of the head table. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She walked toward Jessica and Richard with the steady, terrifying calm of a hurricane eye. "You have humiliated this family enough for one night," Eleanor said to Jessica. "And you," she looked at Richard. "You let her." "Eleanor," Richard stammered. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know she was faking it." "It doesn't matter," Eleanor said. You were willing to throw your mother out of her home for a lie. You were willing to erase me for a lie. The intent was there, Richard. The betrayal is the same." She turned to the security guards who had been hovering by the entrance, unsure of who to obey. "Gentlemen," Eleanor said, "please escort Miss Vane off the property. She is trespassing." "You can't touch me," Jessica spat, backing up. "I have rights. I have clothes upstairs. My jewelry." "We will mail them to you," Sarah shouted from the crowd. "Cod!" The security guards moved in. One of them, a burly man named Frank who had worked for the Sterlings for years, took Jessica's arm. Not gently. "Let's go, miss," Frank grunted. "Get off me!" Jessica thrashed, her gold dress looking cheap and gaudy in the harsh lights. "Richard, help me, don't let them do this!" Richard stood there, paralyzed. He looked at his mother, who was sipping water. He looked at his ex-wife, who was standing tall. And he looked at the woman he had blown up his life for, now being dragged backward toward the door, screaming profanities. He did nothing. As Jessica was hauled out the front door, her screams fading into the night, a heavy silence settled over the ballroom. "Well," Beatrice said, breaking the tension. "That was certainly more entertainment than the string quartet I hired last year." She looked at the guests. "Please, eat the cake. It's lemon chiffon. It would be a shame to waste it." The guests, relieved to have permission to normalize the situation, began to murmur and move toward the buffet. The music, a soft jazz playlist selected by Eleanor earlier, replaced the silence. Richard stood alone in the center of the dance floor. He looked at Eleanor. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse. I need to talk to you." "Not tonight, Richard," Eleanor said. She turned her back on him. "I have guests to attend to. This is, after all, my party now." She walked away, leaving him standing there, a man who had walked in expecting to own a kingdom and was now just a guest in his ex-wife's house. The weeks following the Jubilee disaster, as the tabloids dubbed it, were a blur of legal motions and quiet victories for Eleanor. Life at Harrow's Gate returned to a peaceful rhythm. The LED lights were taken down, the neon art was thrown into a skip, the rose garden was pruned, not paved over. But peace for Eleanor meant chaos for Richard. He was staying at a sleek, soulless hotel downtown. Jessica had vanished for a few days, only to resurface on social media with a long, tearful video about mental health struggles and toxic families, painting herself as the victim of a cruel matriarchy. It wasn't working. The Charleston Gazette had run a 3-part series on the fake pregnancy, complete with quotes from the clinic. Jessica was a pariah. But Richard was just pathetic. On a rainy Tuesday, 3 weeks after the party, Eleanor was in the library paying bills. The new deed sat framed on the desk, a constant reminder of her new reality. She wasn't just a guest in the Sterling life anymore, she was the gatekeeper. Maria knocked on the door. "Mrs. Sterling, he's here again." Eleanor sighed. "Let him in, Maria, but tell him he has 20 minutes. Richard walked in. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. His suit was wrinkled. The silver fox charm had dissolved into exhausted desperation. "Eleanor," he said, standing awkwardly by the leather armchair he used to nap in. "Thank you for seeing me." "Sit down, Richard," she said, not looking up from her ledger. He sat. "How is Mom?" "She's in Boca. She's learned how to use Zoom. She calls me every morning to complain about the humidity, but she sounds happy." "That's good," Richard nodded. He fidgeted with his hands. "And Sarah?" "She's back at college. She blocked your number, Richard. She said she'll unblock it when you grow a spine." Richard winced. "I deserve that. I know I do." He took a deep breath. "Eleanor, I made a mistake. A colossal, life-ruining mistake. I got caught up in, I don't know, the youth, the excitement. Jessica made me feel like I wasn't just Richard the heir, but it was all smoke and mirrors. It was, Eleanor agreed, finally putting her pen down. But you bought the ticket, Richard. You enjoyed the show. I want to come home, he blurted out. I miss you. I miss us. I miss this house. I was insane. Is there any way we can try again? Counseling? Anything? Eleanor looked at him. She felt a phantom ache in her chest, the ghost of the love she had held for him for 25 years. It would be so easy to say yes, to fix him. That had been her job for decades, fixing Richard. But then she remembered the invitation. She remembered the look on his face when Jessica announced the fake pregnancy. She remembered that he hadn't defended her until the lie was exposed. Richard, she said softly, do you know why Beatrice gave the house to me? Because she was angry at me. No, Eleanor shook her head. Because she knew I would protect it. And part of protecting this home is keeping out the things that threaten it. You are a threat, Richard. A threat? I'm your husband. You're a liability, she corrected. You are weak. You let a 24-year-old girl manipulate you into evicting your own mother. If I let you back in, what happens next time? What happens when the next Jessica comes along? There won't be a next time. There is always a next time for men who need to be adored more than they need to be respected, Eleanor said. It was a line she had read in a book, but it felt like it had been written on her bones. I am filing for divorce, Richard, she said. He looked struck. But the house. If we divorce, do I get half? Eleanor almost laughed. Oh, Richard, you really didn't read the papers Beatrice had you sign years ago, did you? The house is in a trust. It's not marital property. It belongs to the trust. And I control the trust. You get your personal savings, your car, and your stocks. But Harrow's Gate? That stays with me. Richard stood up, his face flushing red. You can't do this. This is my family home. My grandfather built this. And your wife saved it, Eleanor said, standing up to meet his gaze. Your 20 minutes are up. Later that night, the phone rang. Eleanor was in the bath, trying to wash away the conversation with Richard. She let it go to voicemail. When she checked it later, the voice on the other end made her blood run cold. It wasn't Richard. It was Jessica. Hey, Eleanor, or should I say, landlady. I saw Richard leaving the house today, looking pretty sad. I guess the reconciliation didn't go well. Bummer. Jessica's voice sounded slurred, unstable. You think you won, don't you? You think because you have the piece of paper, you're the winner. But you forgot something. You forgot that I lived in that house for 6 months. I know where the skeletons are buried, literally. Eleanor frowned, pressing the phone to her ear. I found the journals, Eleanor. In the attic, the old ones, from Richard's dad. The ones about the business deals in the 80s, the illegal ones. Eleanor froze. Richard's father, the late Samuel Sterling, was a legend. But legends often had dark chapters. I took photos, Jessica laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Pages and pages, tax fraud, bribes. It's all there. If you don't want the Sterling name dragged through the mud, if you don't want the IRS coming for your precious house, you're going to cut me a check. A big one. 5 million. Or I post the photos. The message ended. Eleanor stared at the phone. She knew about the journals. Beatrice had mentioned them once, years ago, saying they were better left dusty. She had assumed they were destroyed. If Jessica had them, If she exposed Samuel Sterling's past crimes, the fines and legal battles could bankrupt the estate. The house would have to be sold to pay the debts. Eleanor walked to the window and looked out at the dark grounds of Harrow's Gate. She had fought off the mistress. She had fought off the husband. But now she was fighting the ghosts of the past. She picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Arthur," she said when the lawyer answered. "Wake up. We have a problem. She's not done yet." The morning after the blackmail call, the sky over Harrow's Gate was a bruised, swollen purple. Inside the library, the air felt just as heavy. Eleanor sat in her father-in-law's high-backed leather chair, her hands gripping the armrests. Arthur Higgins, usually the picture of jovial southern charm, looked grim. Between them on the mahogany desk lay the threat, a printed transcript of Jessica's voicemail and a high-resolution photo she had sent as proof. It was a page from a yellowed journal, written in the jagged script of the late Samuel Sterling. Eleanor read the entry again, nausea tightening her stomach. December 12th, 1984. The payment to Councilman Drayton is arranged. 50,000, cash only. The zoning for the warehouse district depends entirely on his silence. A necessary sin. "It's damning, Arthur," Eleanor whispered. "Bribery, corruption. If this gets out, the Sterling Group's stock will tank. The Historical Society will strip our landmark status. We'll be pariahs." Arthur took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Jessica is desperate, Eleanor. She's asking for $5 million? By noon. In Bitcoin. She says she has 3 journals full of this. She says she'll burn the Sterling name to the ground." Arthur picked up the photo. He studied it for a moment, then did something shocking. He chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. "How is this funny?" Eleanor snapped. "It's ironic," Arthur said, a sharp glint in his eye. "Jessica thinks she's found a nuclear bomb. She doesn't know she's holding a dud." He stood and pulled down a dusty binder, labeled Sterling Estate, closed files, 999-2000. Samuel was a ruthless businessman. He did bribe people. But in 1995, after his dementia diagnosis, he panicked about his legacy. He didn't want Richard to inherit his crimes. Arthur slammed the binder on the desk. "We utilized the IRS voluntary disclosure practice. We paid $18 million in fines and back taxes in 1996. We settled the bribery allegations with a confidential plea deal. It's all done, Eleanor. It's settled law." Eleanor stared at him. "So, the journals? Legally? They are historical fiction." Arthur grinned shark-like. "The statute of limitations ran out 20 years ago. But socially? Yes, they could be embarrassing, but they certainly aren't worth $5 million. And they certainly aren't enough to send anyone to prison, except the person trying to use them for extortion." Relief washed over Eleanor, followed quickly by cold anger. "Set up the meeting, Arthur. Let's give her exactly what she deserves." The meeting point was a coffee shop inside a mall near the airport, noisy, anonymous, and smelling of burnt espresso. Eleanor arrived early, wearing dark sunglasses and a trench coat. Arthur sat 2 tables away, his phone recording. Jessica arrived exactly at noon. She looked haggard. The blonde extensions were gone, her hair pulled back in a greasy bun. She wore an oversized hoodie that swallowed her frame. She looked less like a mistress and more like a fugitive. She sat down, dropping a heavy canvas backpack onto the floor with a thud. "Did you bring it?" Jessica hissed, eyes darting nervously. "The crypto transfer." "I don't hold $5 million in Bitcoin, Jessica," Eleanor said calmly. "I need the journals." Jessica kicked the backpack under the table until it hit Eleanor's foot. "They're in there. As soon as I see the confirmation, you get them. If not, I upload photos of every page to the Gazette. I'm fighting for my life. Jessica's voice cracked. Richard kicked me out. I have nothing. I need a fresh start. You ruined your own life, Eleanor replied coldly. You gambled, and you lost. I have the winning hand now, Jessica smirked. Samuel Sterling was a crook. Pay up. Eleanor reached into her bag. Instead of a tablet, she pulled out a thin manila folder and slid it across the table. Your reality check. Jessica opened the folder. Inside were copies of the 1996 IRS settlement agreement and a document labeled Non-Prosecution Agreement. Jessica's hands began to shake. I don't understand. This says he confessed. 25 years ago, Eleanor said. The estate is clean. The journals are just old paper. Go ahead, release them. People love a reformed outlaw. Jessica slumped back, defeated. However, Eleanor continued, her voice hardening, turn to the last page. Jessica turned the page. It was a draft criminal complaint listing Jessica Vane as the defendant. Charges, extortion, and cyberstalking. Arthur has the district attorney on speed dial, Eleanor said, nodding toward the man reading the newspaper nearby. If you leave with those journals, you will be arrested before you reach the exit. That carries a sentence of up to 10 years. Please, Jessica sobbed. I have nowhere to go. I am offering a trade, Eleanor said, standing up. The backpack for a non-disclosure agreement, and $5,000 cash for a plane ticket. Take it, or go to prison. Jessica looked at the cash envelope Eleanor placed on the table. Broken, she slid the backpack across the floor to Eleanor. I hope you rot in that big house, Jessica spat, signing the NDA with a trembling hand. I intend to bloom in it, Eleanor replied. She picked up the journals and walked away, leaving the girl alone in the noise of the mall. 6 months later, the courtroom smelled of floor wax and finality. The divorce hearing for Sterling versus Sterling was a formality. Richard sat at the defendant's table, diminished. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. He lived in a downtown condo now, comfortable but soulless. Eleanor stood opposite him, wearing a sharp white suit that seemed to catch every photon of light in the room. Mrs. Sterling, the judge peered over his glasses. You request to retain your married name? Yes, Your Honor, Eleanor said clearly. It is my daughter's name, and it is the name on the deed to my home. The judge turned to Richard. Do you contest this? Richard looked at the woman who had managed his life, his home, and his mother better than he ever could. No, Your Honor, he said softly. Honestly, she's more of a Sterling than I am. The gavel banged. Dissolution granted. They walked out into the bright spring sunshine. Sarah was waiting on the steps, handing a coffee to Eleanor, while ignoring her father. Sarah, Richard started, his voice hopeful. I sent a birthday card. I got it, Dad, Sarah said, her voice cool. Thanks. I'm trying, Richard muttered. I really am. That's good, Eleanor interjected. She didn't offer forgiveness, but she offered civility. The estate is hosting the annual garden party next month. Beatrice is flying in. Richard looked up, surprised. Am I invited? Eleanor adjusted her sunglasses. You are Sarah's father. You can come. But Richard? Yes. Use the side entrance. The front door is for the owners. She didn't say it with malice, just as a statement of fact. A boundary drawn in concrete. Richard nodded slowly, accepting his new place in the hierarchy. The final scene returns to where it began. Harrow's Gate. The evening of the garden party was unrecognizable from the disaster 6 months prior. No neon lights, no techno music, just hundreds of soft lanterns hanging from the oaks and a string quartet playing Debussy. Eleanor stood at the top of the stone stairs in an emerald green gown, greeting the elite of Charleston. A black car pulled up, and Beatrice Sterling emerged. She looked rejuvenated, tan and rested. She ascended the stairs and took Eleanor's hands. "The hydrangeas look magnificent," Beatrice noted. "You used the acidic fertilizer?" "Twice a week," Eleanor smiled. Beatrice leaned in close. "Arthur told me how you handled the girl and the journals. Efficient, ruthless. I'm proud. I did what was necessary." "I have something for you," Beatrice said, pulling a heavy rusted iron key from her purse. "The key to the secret wine cellar, behind the false wall. Samuel kept the 1945 Romani Conti there. I never gave it to Richard." Beatrice pressed the key into Eleanor's palm. "The house is truly yours now, Eleanor. Not just on paper, but because you know its secrets." Eleanor closed her fingers around the cool metal. She looked out over the lawn. She saw Sarah laughing. She saw Richard standing quietly by the rose garden, an accepted guest, but no longer the king. "Shall we go in?" Eleanor asked. "After you, my dear." Beatrice stepped aside. "After you." Eleanor turned and walked through the front doors of her home, her heels clicking on the marble with the sound of absolute, undeniable ownership. And that is how you play the long game. Jessica thought she could win with a fake baby, and Richard thought he could win with entitlement. But Eleanor won with the most dangerous weapons of all: patience, receipts, and a top-tier lawyer. It's a reminder that class isn't about how much money you spend on a party. It's about how you handle the cleanup. Eleanor didn't just keep the house, she reclaimed her dignity. And honestly, we think she earned every single brick of Harrow's Gate. What did you think of Beatrice's master plan? Would you have forgiven Richard, or would you have locked the gate forever? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a drama-filled story time. See you in the next one.